Georgia's presidential primary is just a few weeks away. Have you picked your candidate yet? Maybe you cottoned to Cruz. Perhaps you're stumping for Trump, or you might be Hillary all the way. No surprise, this is a hot topic at the Gold Dome right now, and we're curious to see who's supporting who and why. So grab a ringside seat. We've invited some of Georgia's top lawmakers to duke it out with us tonight. That and all the day's important political news is coming your way. Lawmakers starts right now. Welcome to Day 10 of the 2016 legislative session. I'm Bill Nigut. Before we dig into tonight's smorgasbord of presidential primary politics, let's check in with Shelby Lynn for the latest news from the Capitol. Hi, Shelby.
We begin tonight's Capitol Report, Bill, with the firing of Assistant State School Superintendent Jeremy Spencer. Spencer was fired for controversial and racially charged posts on his Facebook page. An angry Senator Vincent Fort brought the matter to the Senate floor this morning and demanded immediate action.
It has come to my attention that an associate superintendent of the Department of Education, Jeremy Spencer, has posted on his Facebook page some of the most vile images.
Fort says the posts on Spencer's page were hurtful and racist and attracted others who posted anti-Obama slogans on his page.
It says about Obama, impeach and ... And there's a picture of a lynching. Mr. Spencer has crossed the line. The superintendent of the Department of Education needs to fire Spencer today.
As Fort was speaking, word got out that Jeremy Spencer, the brother of Woodbine Republican Jason Spencer, was fired from his $138,000 a year position. State Department of Education Superintendent Richard Woods released this statement. Like most people, I was disheartened and disgusted to see the posts made by Mr. Spencer on his Facebook page. These posts in no way reflect my opinions or those of the Department of Education. As of this morning, Mr. Spencer is no longer an employee of the Department of Education. Representative Spencer told GPB that the superintendent did what he had to do. He also said he's disappointed in his brother's Facebook postings, but believes his brother was targeted by activists on the left.
He did not use good Facebook hygiene to get rid of some of those pictures that people would post on his thread. Unfortunately, the world that we live in is, we live in a very highly, a high PC culture, politically correct culture. There are certain standards in the use of political correctness, and unfortunately, I believe that he's been a target of that.
Spencer called the situation, quote, awkward, and even as he defended his twin brother, he also tried to distance himself from his siblings' Facebook comments.
You know, the guilt by association is absolutely something that people will think, and I understand that. I know my brother's heart. I'm not a racist. I actually attended a historically black university at Alabama State University in Montgomery on a tennis scholarship. So I've been taught some lessons that you will not be taught in a white-dominated university.
Representative Spencer repeated several times that he's not a racist and doesn't think his brother is either.
However, that's questionable based on his Facebook post, and that's hard to defend. But I do know my brother's heart. He wasn't happy about other people posting those things on his Facebook thread that he failed to delete.
Also today, a hearing on a bill that would change the scoring formula for the Hope Scholarship Program. It gives students higher points for taking courses in computer science and other more rigorous fields of study. The hearing took place before the House Higher Education Committee. The bill is sponsored by Representative Jan Jones of Milton.
This initiative will encourage young people to develop the 21st century skills demanded in STEM fields and make Georgia even more competitive in attracting high-tech companies to locate and expand in our state.
Amy Lancaster of the Metro Atlanta Chamber supports the measure, saying that encouraging students to take these courses gives them a better chance of finding a job when they graduate. Another supporter is Tino Mantella of the Technology Association of Georgia. He says there are 10,000 technology jobs available in the country, and right now they're hard to fill.
It's taking up to 6 months to fill these jobs. And if they don't fill them here, and the company has pressure to fill the jobs, they're going to fill them somewhere else, whether it be out of state or out of country.
The committee approved the bill with no debate, and it now goes to the House Rules Committee. Finally tonight, a compromise between the Georgia craft beer industry and the state's wholesalers. It ends the battle over how these small businesses can operate in Georgia. Lawmakers passed legislation last year, but there were problems with how it was enforced by the state revenue department. Today's agreement means avoiding another fight over more craft beer legislation this year. Looking ahead now, Bill, we're expecting a hearing tomorrow on Allen Peake's expanded marijuana legislation. The hearing will give opponents of the measure a chance to testify and voice their opinions. That's it from the Capitol. Back to you.
Thanks, Shelby. Before we get started, I want to remind you that if you plan to vote in Georgia's March 1st presidential primary, and you really ought to, you need to make sure you're registered. The deadline is fast approaching. It's February 1st, which is next Monday. Remember, Georgia has an open primary, which allows all registered voters to choose which primary they want to vote in. So get your registrations in. Early voting starts in a matter of a couple of weeks. It's going to be very, very interesting. Joining me tonight to talk about all things presidential, Jim Galloway of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He's the political writer who you see on Thursdays and Sundays in the paper and every day on Political Insider. Senator Nan Orrock, a Democrat from Atlanta who is a Hillary Clinton supporter. Senator William Ligon, Republican from Brunswick, who's backing Ted Cruz, and Senator Burt Jones, a Republican from Jackson. He is a Donald Trump supporter. Thank you all for coming in. And as we told our viewers at the start of this season, on the nights that we have an opportunity to talk presidential politics with legislators, we really want to do that. So we really are glad you could all be here. Let me start very briefly by looking at the latest from Nate Silver's 538.com. You know, Nate Silver is kind of considered one of the wizards of polling out there. Let's look at what he says right now. He's taken an average of 10 Georgia polls, and I don't think these numbers will surprise anyone. Trump's at 36, Cruz is at 26, Rubio at 11, Carson at 7, Bush way down at 4. So this isn't a prediction of anything. It's just if you take 10 polls, as he did, and average them, that's what you come up with. Are you surprised your man Trump is up by 10 points here?
No, Bill, I'm not surprised. He's pretty much held a consistent lead throughout this entire campaign, and his message is resonating with the voters, and particularly here in Georgia.
What's the message that you think is resonating, particularly with Georgia voters?
I think so many people are tired of the political establishment, tired of, it's much like the phenomenon we saw with our United States Senator, David Perdue. David Perdue was an outsider, and he talked about the Washington process is broken, and we need someone with business experience that has a history of getting things done in the private sector, and it's working, you know, and the reason why I jumped on the Trump camp so early is because he was talking about the things like the national deficit. We're almost at $20 trillion in debt here in this country, and it seems like that nobody's even talking about it. And also like our broken immigration system right now, and also the trade deficit that we have with other countries right now is something that is resonating with people. We're all for free trade, but when you, I want free but equal trade. So when we're buying $1 billion worth of product from China, I would like.
But I'm not sure Trump is for free trade the way he's described himself in this campaign.
Right. I mean, he's the guy who's going to cut the deal with China. And I think he's already, the Pacific Pact, he's already pretty much dismissed.
Doesn't want it, right.
But let me, if I could ask the Senator here, I mean, do you think the bluster that you see out of a Trump appearance, does that hurt him, or would he be doing better if he were a little bit more calm, or is that part of the attraction?
I can't argue with what he's been doing because it's obviously been working. He's got a big personality, and he's taken the oxygen out of the room, so to speak, with the other candidates. And does he say things that will come off of offensive to some people? Yeah, he has. But at the same time, you've got a big group of people who have not been involved in the process that seem to find that refreshing.
William,
Yes.
or Senator, I apologize. Your candidate, Ted Cruz, for a long time adopted a strategy that he was going to remain friendly towards Donald Trump on the assumption that if Trump started to fail, Cruz would be the likely inheritor of his supports. And that's probably correct, except Trump hasn't fallen, and you've got to wonder right now whether Cruz made a mistake not attacking him as he is now earlier, don't you?
Well, no, I don't know that he made a mistake. I think it was perfectly fine for him to take the strategy that he did. And in many ways, Cruz is also seen as an outsider, as an anti-establishment candidate, and he has taken that position and proven that in some of the stances that he's taken in the United States Senate. So, I think eventually rivals will have to turn and address each other, and you have the top two candidates that are beginning to do that now.
They sure are.
Right. One of the most fascinating things I've ever seen in a campaign is, okay, you've had the rise of Donald Trump, and you've had Ted Cruz, who's followed a fairly traditional path. I mean, Attorney General in Texas and into the U.S. Senate. And yet, right now, you have the GOP establishment starting to line up behind Donald Trump, not Ted Cruz. How does that play out? And what impact does it have here, just from both of you?
Well, Ted Cruz has been a thorn in the side of the establishment in Washington, and he has called them out on some issues that, frankly, they have not agreed with. He's the one that filibustered the Affordable Care Act, and everyone was against some of those tactics that he had, but he's proven himself right. I mean, that's a disaster. It's causing people all across the country to incur additional cost in their medical expenses. It's cost the state of Georgia hundreds of millions of dollars, and will continue to cost us money in the future for our state health employee benefit plans. So, he's.
Let me interrupt. Senator Orrock, as an observer of all this, as a Democrat watching it happen, are you fascinated by the fact Donald Trump has been able to come up with words, Jeb Bush, low energy, that stick, that have an impact on the electorate out there? Now, he's talking about Ted Cruz as nasty. Nobody likes him. And it's a simple phrase like that seems to get into the conversation, and Ted Cruz's numbers appear to be falling in Iowa, where he had a significant lead. You have to have a certain admiration for the way Trump is able to do that, don't you?
Well, I think bumper sticker politics works. It's unfortunate that a lot of people aren't thinking ahead or thinking deeply or thinking at the big picture. And a bumper sticker politics, I've heard a Republican who was for immigration reform trying to work with President Bush to get an immigration reform, and he said that one word, amnesty, and you can't have a 5-minute discussion that you need to have to talk about a complex issue like immigration and how it impacts the economy and what posture we need to be in. That was a Republican senator who's gone back home now to Mississippi, Trent Lott. But so bumper sticker politics work, sadly. Hit an emotional button and you're off to the races.
It seems to work for Trump in a way that it just doesn't for many other people out there.
I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, his current, I can scarcely believe what we're seeing in the last 24 to 48-hour news cycle of the things that are coming out, the anti-Muslim ballooning message from his campaign. A friend of mine's wearing a hat now, let's make America hate, as opposed to let's make America great because of the messages that are coming out of the Trump campaign are so vitriolic. And it's going in a dangerous direction, in my opinion. And I think more people are increasingly concerned about it. On the other hand, Ted Cruz, I think you are right that he is sliding and the nasty tag is working. But I know Zogby, the pollster, said when you see Cruz going up, you'll see a massive block of Republicans called the ABC coalition. Anybody but Cruz.
But let me ask. I mean, she does raise a good point. I mean, this time, or in 2012, in the aftermath of Mitt Romney's defeat, you had Reince Priebus get up and conduct a thorough autopsy of the Republican defeat, and he said that Republicans need to reach out to women more, to minorities more. And I don't see that happening with either the Cruz campaign or the Trump campaign. Am I wrong here?
Well, I mean, when we talk about bumper sticker politics, I mean, 8 years ago we had Hope and Change, and that was a phenomenon that rose and won a presidency. A lot of people would argue there wasn't a lot of substance when that election was going on. I know you would probably argue different. Now, what Trump brings to the table is a guy who is not necessarily talking to the mainstream Republican base. We had an event for him in Macon, Georgia. We had 8,000 or 9,000 people at the venue. It was a sold-out venue, and I talked to, literally dozens of people who said that they had been lifelong Democrats. But because of what's going on in our country today, they're frustrated with the direction of our country, and therefore they said they were going to give Trump an opportunity. I think same can be said on the Democratic side with the rise of Bernie Sanders. Yeah, Hillary's the front runner, but there is a group, a large population on the left and the right that are very upset with the direction of our country.
We're going to have to take a break in a minute, but I want to just make sure I'm correct about this. You're kind of an outlier among your colleagues in the legislature, aren't you, Senator? There are not many of you down there, elected leaders under the Gold Dome, who have supported Trump, unless I'm wrong. Many of them are in the Cruz camp, and interestingly enough, there are an awful lot of Kasich people down there, especially among some of the leaders. Yes,
there are. Yes.
So, am I right that there aren't too many Trump legislators right now?
Myself and Senator Michael Williams.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, that's right. So,
but not that anybody's counting, right?
Well, going back to your point, I mean, you said you don't see either camp reaching out to the minority groups, but I mean, Senator Cruz has a Hispanic heritage, so I mean, he certainly is reaching out to those groups and to other minority groups and is making an effort to do that. And part of his message is that, look, my platform and our policies that I would enact if I'm president will help these different groups. So I think he is trying to do that.
We're going to come back. We're going to talk a little bit about the Democratic race. Senator, you mentioned Bernie Sanders. He's making some moves, Senator Orrock. But we're also going to talk about an interesting development in South Georgia that Jim Galloway's Political Insider reported today. So coming up on Lawmakers, we'll have a lot more on the primary season. And I'll check in with our panel regarding key issues ahead for the Georgia legislature, if we have time. But first, how well do you know your lawmakers? Representative Mike Lanton is a Democrat representing House District 75 in Jonesboro. He was first sworn in as a member of the General Assembly in 2007. He served 2 terms before an unsuccessful Senate bid and returned to the House in 2013. As a retired U.S. Army war veteran, Lanton has lived in more than a dozen countries around the world, including 13 years in Germany. His favorite places include Hawaii and Dubai. He loves music, and as a longtime DJ, he's played all kinds of gigs, including his own daughter's prom in 1999. We're back with more Lawmakers in a minute.
Want to know why? Get the answers you've been seeking on the next Why Wednesday. First, why are these iconic southern serpents on the decline? Georgia Outdoors explores the lives of snakes and finds out what makes Georgia home to such a diverse group of reptiles. It's Snakes Alive on Georgia Outdoors. Next, what sneaky mating techniques are successful in the animal world? Nature explores the crafty ways that animals woo a partner. It's part 3 of Natural Born Hustlers, Sex, Lies, and Dirty Tricks. Then, how are scientists hoping to predict the next earthquake in Nepal? Last April, a devastating earthquake rocked the Himalayas, wiping out villages and leaving thousands dead. Nova reveals the anatomy of this mega-quake while the region races to rebuild. Don't miss Himalayan Megaquake. Finally, where does life present some of its most remarkable challenges? From a painful rite of passage in the Amazon to battling killer bees. Witness wonders of the living world on the final episode of Earth's Natural Wonders. Catch the latest from the worlds of science and nature on this week's Why Wednesday.
Did you know that today marks the successful effort to remove the Confederate battle emblem from Georgia's state flag? On this date, January 26, 2001, Governor Roy Barnes got Senate committee approval on a new design that had already passed the House. Within days, the very controversial 1956 flag came down, and the new design was hoisted above the state capitol. And we all know how that turned out for Governor Barnes in the next election. All right, wait, let's clarify this. Our show writer, Lisa Clark, says, I said the word debacle. She said it's pronounced debacle. Before we go anywhere else, is she right?
She is right.
There's
Debacle
no
is it.
pronunciation of debacle that's correct.
No.
Oh, my God. Embarrassed.
Leave your producer.
Embarrassed as I'm. Lisa, you were right. All right, look, welcome back to Lawmakers. I'm here with the AJC's Jim Galloway, Senator Nan Orrock, Senator William Ligon, and Senator Burt Jones. Nan Orrock, what is happening to Hillary Clinton? Is Bernie Sanders about to beat her in Iowa and New Hampshire? Is that something that we in the media are just drumming up because we like the excitement?
The media loves to pit and to have a controversy, and there certainly is one. They're contesting their party's nomination for President of the United States. I wouldn't be surprised to see Bernie take those states, but I will say to you, I think that'll be the end of the run.
You think she does have an effective firewall as the campaign turns south? She comes to South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama.
Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton have long and deep roots in the South. Certainly she was the first lady in Arkansas before his race for the presidency. And the South has a huge swath of minority voters. African-American voters have a deep affection for the Clintons and a belief in them. And who can forget that under Bill Clinton's 8-year term, his 2 terms, 8 years, we had great economic forward leap.
Jim, you have an interesting take on whether we should see some signs, perhaps, in the South that Hillary Clinton may not have the firewall.
Right.
The
first thing, I mean, right after Iowa and New Hampshire, we've got south, the race turns south into South Carolina.
That's right.
Watch Jim Clyburn, U.S. representative out of South Carolina, pretty much the most powerful Democrat in that state.
And African American.
African American, and he is not terribly fond of the Clintons. Because of what happened when Bill Clinton came campaigning for Hillary in 2008 and compared Barack Obama's campaign to that of Jesse Jackson.
We already have a Democratic legislator in South Carolina who today...
A state legislator
who today announced he was switching his support from Hillary Clinton to Bernie Sanders. You have to hope that isn't a sign that more is coming, right?
Yeah, and I don't believe it is. I don't know the name of that particular legislator, but that's one in a myriad of folks. I don't know any Democratic legislators in Georgia that are supporting Bernie. You may be able to tell me of one, but in the Senate, I think I can firmly say that.
Is there a sense of obligation? Given that you had Hillary pin down a lot of this support in 2008, only to see it leak away when Barack Obama's campaign took off. I mean, do you think there's a sense of, well, we didn't do right by her in 2008 and we need to stick by her this year?
I don't get that at all. I think that she's tested, she's tried, she contested for this office 8 years ago. She has been Secretary of State and served around the world. There's cause for great confidence in her ability for leadership.
Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
I think that's part of her problem. I think that we're beginning to see the cracks in the Clinton Foundation because I know they have the foundation, but in her platform and in her candidacy, because of some of the problems that she's had. I mean, she has this huge problem with her email scandal. People are beginning to question her credibility and whether or not we really want to trust her with the power of the presidency. And
go ahead.
So I think that's beginning to resonate with people. And they also need to understand that she is no Bill Clinton. I mean, she does not have his personality, does not have that aura around him. And so she's beginning to lose people.
But I got to say, how is, in this, I think she's a little bit like Donald Trump. What more can you throw at her to bring her numbers down?
That she hasn't survived. That's right. And I will say to you, there is a powerful yearning across this land to break the glass ceiling and put a woman of quality and substance, demonstrated leadership in the White House.
So if you're a Republican, Trump, Cruz, take your choice on which one becomes the nominee. Who would you want to run against? You want to run against Bernie Sanders, a man who's a self-proclaimed socialist? Right. You want to run against Hillary Clinton, who has a long resume that may have already been vetted to the extent it'll ever be. Who would you rather have here in Georgia?
I think, no question, Bernie Sanders, if you're a Republican, that's who you want to take on. He, to all the Clintons, all the negative talk about the Clintons, they do have a political machine. And they've been in this political network for a long time.
Would she be a good president?
Well, obviously, I'd be for her if I thought she's going to be a good president.
Not necessarily. I mean, she might win. Do you think if she won that she might make a decent president?
I think in a country of over 300 million people, I believe we have an ability to elect somebody outside of being a Clinton or a Bush.
Okay.
So,
who do you want to run against?
Well, I don't know that it really matters. I think that the country is just tired of the last 8 years. The policies that we've had over the last 8 years, and Hillary Clinton is going to be seen as a continuation of those policies, and Bernie Sanders is going to be seen as someone who's going to make it worse.
Jim, do you think that Georgians, we got about a minute left, do you think that Georgians would find a Bernie Sanders a hard candidate to embrace compared to a Hillary Clinton?
I think the line, he ain't from around here, would be kind of the ruling sentiment here. I mean, but seriously, I think African Americans in the South are a lot more conservative than you might think. And I think in that sense, I think Hillary Clinton would be far more appealing to them on that choice.
Younger people are interested in Bernie, and I very much admire Bernie Sanders. I'm glad he's in the race. I think we're having a vigorous discussion, but we're not debating on blocking women from choosing how to plan their family or blocking women from equal pay. They're debating on which pathway is the best to secure it.
I've got to interrupt you because we're completely out of time, Senator Orrock. You got the last word, which is good for you. Thanks to all of you for being with us here tonight. And that does it for day 10 of the 2016 legislative session. 25% of the session is finito. Only 30 days left to go. We'll be back tomorrow for day 11 with coverage of the annual State of the Judiciary address from Georgia Chief Justice Hugh Thompson. You know, if you want to keep track of us on Facebook, you can. Also at Twitter at GPB News, or check out our email at gpb.org/lawmakers, where you'll find full episodes of all of our shows and more information than that. Don't miss Political Rewind live every Wednesday at 2 and Friday at 3 on 88.5. Thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow.